Chapter 10. My sandals clapping the cobblestones echoed like two pieces of firewood when knocked together, but the sound faded to the back of my mind when my gaze elevated to the high black spires towering over the massive stone structure. The magnitude of its gray bricks made me wonder what feats of magical engineering must have been used to relocate such massive materials, let alone stack them skyward. You have discovered Warrington. 75 XP. To our left, the town bustled with activity. More people than I'd ever seen milled about with baskets balanced on their forearms, packs on their backs, or carts rolling behind the force of their bodies. Hooves clopped. The merged voices formed a persistent drone that brought a pang of trepidation, while at the same time, an airy feeling filled my chest. Shabana's ears perked, then twisted as she took it all in. Her tail twitched and rose. To a woman used to only the quiet life of a farm setting, it was loud, distracting. Roshan uttered words now and then, but my focus was split by the multitudes. The single and double-story structures lining the main thoroughfare were well built. Unlike our barn, there were no loose boards needing to be hammered, no aged wood to be whitewashed, and no lazy tilt. Instead, the structure stood on stone foundations that leveled them. Paint colors varied so they were nourishment to my longing eyes. Roshan marched us past a large gate, and I peered through it longingly at the double doors in the distance, at the end of a winding cobblestone path. When she noticed the diversion of my attention, she clasped my hand. "I wanted to show you the best part first." She squeezed, and even if the noise overwhelmed, I was comforted. We passed another side street where all the buildings were single-story. Then she tugged me to the right, drawing me past a lower gate that stood wide open. Short, wide steps led to the white double doors of the otherwise maroon building. Two petite statues on pedestals depicted the goddess with her hands outstretched as if to welcome visitors. "The temple?" I asked. "Yes." Roshan swung the doors open, released my hand, then passed inside. The scent of wood and polishing wax swam on the air from the pews on either side of a wide aisle. I drew a deep breath. You have discovered the Academy Temple. 35 XP. Roshan strolled toward the mammoth stone altar on a dais on the opposite side. "When we arrived, these pews were simply rotting benches, but the people of Warrington set to work constructing new ones within days." She swung her head around to peer at me. 3 carpenters in town, each of differing specialties, chipped in. I noted 2 doorways on either side of the altar, at the outside edges of the interior, and wondered where they led. Roshan circled the altar, set both hands on it, then smiled. "Welcome to my home. I bring each student here before we take them into the academy proper. My message is of welcome, and it's imperative you know when you butt up against challenging times with your studies or in your interactions with others, this is a place of refuge for you. Experience any concerns at all, you should come here to me. The Academy's leadership is well equipped to take care of your needs, but mine is the domain of the spiritual, and even though we don't have to pray or speak of Solara, my ear is always here to listen." I already liked her. The relief washing over me released a tension deeper than the stress of being in a town for the first time. I'd carried tightness in my arms, legs, and shoulders since the moment I saw my father's life come to a violent end. And now, it was finally beginning to ease. The black demon tried to jump into my memories again, but I wouldn't have his dark presence in such a place of the light. So I shoved it away, choosing instead to focus on the features of the priestess from abroad. I bowed deeply, like Baba taught me, even though he never allowed me near anyone to use the sign of respect. "Thank you, priestess." Shabana didn't bow, but she pressed her chin to her chest. "Thanks, Roshan. You're the best." Her lips curved into the briefest smile. "Come, the magister welcomes every student and she'll be waiting for you." We exited through the hallway to the left leading to the back door. Outside, tiny little wire fences sectioned off rows of herbs, and the dominant scent of rosemary streamed into my nostrils. Another cobblestone path split the herb gardens, then curved to the right to the side door of a 2-story building of the same stone bricks that made up the academy proper. You have discovered the Academy dormitories. 35 XP. Marble dormitory floors reflected the sunshine through the skylights running the length of the hallway 2 stories above. From the bottom floor, The rows of doors on the second were visible, and they aligned perfectly with those we passed. "Is this where we'll live?" Roshan shook her head. "The two of you will live in the east wing on the other side of the library. These rooms are already assigned." The word library stuck to my mind like honey to my tongue. Comprehension of a place that could house physical tomes instead of the ones I'd read all my life in my mind window, interface, I corrected myself, was beyond me. Then Roshan swung open the door, used her backside to prop it open, then waved us through. "You have discovered the research library, 35 XP. Straight ahead. Go past the archivist's desk, then all the way to that door in the distance." The high shelves stuffed with leather-bound titles crept along the walls all the way to the second-floor ceiling. The massive skylight here drew a breath of awe from my chest, as I couldn't imagine how someone could cut glass so massive, even less get it to stay in place. Then a wave of light shimmered across it like a serpent winding sideways. My chin dropped. "Is that barrier magical?" "Your eye isn't to be underestimated, Tess. Yes, it's magic, and it's been there since the university was built centuries ago. I'm still in awe of it." I nodded, but the calm energy pervading the place left me at a loss for words. A huge circular desk of the polished wood sat in the center of the massive space. 4 paths from every direction led to it. It was surrounded by rows of long, polished tables of the same material. A woman with blazing yellow eyes peered through spectacles at something below the desk's front, her head tilted up as we passed. She flashed Roshan a short smile. Her gaze flitted to Shabana, then me, before returning to her task. When we passed through yet another door at the opposite end of the library, we entered a domed circular room with wood-paneled walls. Although I received a message in my interface, there was no additional XP awarded, maybe because this was also considered part of the dormitory split by the library. A circular skylight constructed of elongated slivers of glass separated by metal grids was nested high above. Even so, candle holders sat atop desks that lined the open door. The space between the doors on the periphery left me surmising these rooms were larger than those in the first dorms. Roshan pointed to the second floor near the opposite end of the dome. "Those last 2 doors are yours. You have the honor of being the final students admitted this term." She stopped at the opposite end of the dormitory. "That test came to us only a day before the term started strikes me as a blessing from the divine goddess. We thought the final room would sit empty. As you can imagine, scouting the countryside and getting word out that young mana users are welcome to study here now is a daunting task. A long history riddled with dark tales of abuse leaves parents hesitant to send their mana-bearing children to us." Shabana twisted her lips into a smirk. "That, and their fear the king won't approve. His soldiers could come to restore his edicts any day." "Should the boy king send fighters all this way, let them come. We will see them approaching from afar. Worry not." Shabana shook her head. "With respect, I'm not worried. Those are just the facts. People have good reason to be scared. Maybe when we get the first term behind us and the worries of civil war abate, more will send their children. Students schooled in magic might even make good recruiters. Don't you agree?" Roshan's lip curved down into a contemplative frown. An interesting idea. I will bring it up at the next council meeting." "Really?" Shabana asked. "Why not? Do you assume because you're a new student we would dismiss your ideas? Does the validity of an idea degrade because of its source? I think not." The priestess didn't wait for an answer. We passed out of the dorms and across another cobblestone walkway to the looming academy proper. A bead of vertigo tilted the surface beneath my feet when I craned my head back to view the high, black spires. To our left, on the opposite side from the town, was a gigantic grassy field surrounded by a wooden fence. I'd once built a fenced paddock so our horse could exercise between my father's trading trips to the peaks. The work kept me busy and I hadn't been allowed to ride as much as I'd liked. But if I thought that fence had been a laborious exercise, the one before me would have taken me months. My arms would have fallen off. Double doors prefaced our entry to the academy. After a final glance at the spires, I stepped inside. I was instantly struck by the massive interior of the entryway. Although high and ominous from the outside, the interior could not possibly have fit in the facade. How is this so? Another sense of vertigo washed over me, then I set one hand against a low wall to steady myself. It can be a little disorienting at first, Roshan said. The academy is an instanced area, so the interior exists on a different plane than what you see outside. The concept is a baffling illustration of the goddess's magical gifts to Enora. I shook my head in disbelief. But the goddess didn't build the academy, did she? No. It was built long ago by very powerful magicians. During my tour, the magister informed me the outside was built to impress, but when soldiers of the monarch preceding the Luttrell line murdered the sole heir of the previous monarchy and took power, they tried to burn the University of Warrington to the ground as a message to the eastern side of the continent that they could reach it at will. I twisted my lips to one side, and now we're testing the Luttrell line's will to do the same. Roshan didn't dignify my response. Instead of rebuilding, the magicians of old combined their powers and drew massive amounts of energy from the ley lines to create the instance. Some believe that's all nonsense. Others treat this history with reverence. The magister counted among them. And what do you think? I asked. Such feats would be impossible today. The suppression of magic has weakened the casters of Rubal, but the instance had to come from somewhere. Whether it was something the goddess built or constructed by her blessings upon long-dead mana channelers makes little difference to me. I suppose it depends on the extent of your imagination. The master of our foundation theorized it was once a dungeon, reformed to suit a different purpose. My back teeth clenched. The two of you frustrate me with your unwillingness to tell me anything about this master of yours. If you think you're frustrated, wait until Master During begins teaching you attribute calculations and functions. Master Fowler has his reasons for secrecy. At least now I knew the reason for the name of the place. They spoke like he was some magical creature instead of a man. Curiosity spawned frustration, but I shoved the troublesome thoughts from my head into my chest, then blew them out in a slow sigh like Baba taught me. I counted 3 stories of tomes shelved around us, with spiral staircases spinning up in every corner. 1 man and 3 women manned a desk near the front entrance's high stone doors. Although we hadn't entered that way, I could imagine a visitor's first impression when entering through those doors. There was a certain practicality to the architecture. If they were like me, the desk would have drawn them forward instead of venturing up the staircases. We passed the desk without a glance. Then Roshan stopped at a pair of white doors with intricate carvings that reminded me of the runes I'd drawn into my staff. Guards with pointed ears wearing ivory plate greeted us.
"Good day, priestess,"
the elf on the right said.
"The magister is expecting you."
The guards turned in perfect unison, then each shoved open a door to reveal the interior. A woman with black hair streaked with gray stood, then spread her arms wide. The desk was oak if I'd ever spied it, and since the thick trees were the dominant strain filling the thickets near our farm, I'd seen plenty. Like the door outside, the front of a desk was awash in carved symbols, and now I wondered if they were decorative or actually held magical properties. Analysis proved nothing. Oak desk. The magister's desk is big. It's made of oak. Type, furniture. Quality, very rare. Durability, 150 of 150. Gee, thanks. A grand fireplace filled only with ash sat to our right. Shabana, Tess, welcome. Her accent was thick, and I wondered about its origins. She nodded at the priestess as she gestured at 2 chairs. Please sit. Roshan turned toward the door. Wait, I said. You're leaving? She nodded. I have services soon. Don't worry. You can come see me any time. Magister Lyra will see you're shown to your rooms. Oh. A hole swelled in the pit of my stomach at the prospect of losing the calm the priestess projected, but it was time to grow up. I bowed. Thank you, Roshan, for everything. To my surprise, the priestess strode over, stood on her toes, cupped my face in both hands, then kissed my forehead. Although I was several inches taller, she maintained the stance to peer into my eyes. I know what it is to lose your father before your eyes. Bring your grief to me when it rises, and we will share it. With that, the priestess strode out of the room. The flowing bottom hem of her robe combined with her steady gait gave the impression she floated. When I turned from the doors, Shabana was already seated, with her tail curving out of the chair behind her. I'm Interim Magister Lyra. It's my duty to see you well equipped to take on the challenges of stringent curriculum here at Warrington Academy. She rolled her eyes, and I got the impression the gesture was intended for herself. like she struggled with an old habit that hadn't quite died. "You'll find our instructors fair but stern. The rules here must be followed at all times, and we have little patience for those who are accustomed to setting aside such standards. Are you with me so far?" We nodded. Her eyes darted from mine to Shabana's, then back again. "The Academy Council has worked hard to modify the university standards to new purpose. I will provide you with a copy of the guide, and you will follow the rules set inside." She interlocked the fingers of one hand with the other, set them gently on her desk, then leaned forward. "But allow me to give you a preview because I've already sent one student packing, and you need to understand the gravity of your responsibilities, okay?" Although her words brought a certain weight with them, the tension I would have expected never rose in me. Something about the kindness in her face and low, easy delivery set me at ease and allowed me to focus. "Okay," I said. Shabana nodded her consent. "At no times will you cast harmful magic against another student unless under the supervision of a master instructor in a duel. If you do so, you will be reprimanded, penalized, and, depending on the level of the infraction, possibly removed from the academy. There will be no tolerance for violence against your peers. Is that understood?" We nodded. I would hear you affirm this verbally. Color filled the Michonne's cheeks. "Yes," we both replied. The magister shook her head. "You will address all academy personnel with their titles, then their given name. I am Magister Lira. Roshan is Master Roshan. Now try again." Shabana dipped her chin to show the magister the top of her head. "Yes, Magister Lira." The suddenly hard eyes darted in my direction. "Yes, Magister Lira." "Good." She gently slapped the table, then leaned back in her chair, but not so she reclined in the least. Although her posture didn't relax, her tone did. "I spent decades running a magic shop in Brumhill. Before that, I was a student of this place when it was called a university. We have just set a dark history behind us, so you should take that into account when you consider our rules. Although you'll find discipline at the top of our mandate list, you'll understand why as you expand the boundaries of your power. You are here to learn. We will feed you. As first-year students, you will learn to make your own clothing or buy it in town with your own coin. By doing it yourself, you could gain ranks in weaving and render your old garments obsolete in short order. The last thing you'll want is to fall behind. Although we will provide some materials, you will also learn to hunt them down for yourselves. We have a leatherworking curriculum, weaving, and woodworking." Shabana leaned forward. "What about smithing?" Lyra shook her head. "The Templars in the north are starting their own school for those wishing to wield edged weapons and wear heavy armor. They will teach smithing and other associated skills there. If it's your desire to serve as a paladin or something of that nature, I can put in a word for you." She gazed expectantly at Shabana. The Michonne shook her head and lowered her eyes. "No, I wish to make the most of my mana. I would be a healer." "A fine use of your magic. And you?" She cocked an eyebrow as she turned her gaze in my direction. "No, I'm fine right here." "Good. We are discussing how we could bring students from these academies together in the future to push back the lower demon scourge running rampant across our lands. Those negotiations continue. But I digress, and you should focus on what you control. Now the important part. We have 2 schools within the academy. One is for light magic, the other is for shadowcasters. There are curriculum-specific courses, but one discipline will share some classes with the other, especially when they reach second year. My understanding is Shabana's strength is her light affinity, and she wishes to choose the light. What of you, Tess? I raised the applicable content in my interface with a thought. Magic affinities. Potential, 100%. Light, 23%. Shadow, 91%. I eyed the 91% shadow affinity in my interface, then read Shabana's expectant expression. The light as well. I gave a deep nod. Shabana's shoulders dropped with relief, and I was happy to see she wanted me around as much as I wanted to be around her. May I ask your affinity? Lyra asked. My light affinity is 23%. Not very high, but it can be raised with practice. What's your magic potential? My lips tightened, as I was unsure I wanted to set unreasonable expectations on myself right out of the gate. But something about the age of the magister and the curious way her eyes almost peered inside me told me to play it straight. Besides, Shabana already knew. My potential is 100%. Lyra jerked. 100! Her head whipped side to side as her gaze flitted from one of us to the other. But I haven't seen... Huh. What about your shadow affinity? Do you have one? Although I wasn't ready to start things off with a lie, I wasn't about to come clean either, lest I be thrown into classes with a bunch of strangers. I have no interest in shadow. Lyra's eyebrows raised, then dropped. Fine, I won't press. But someday you might change your mind, and I'd hate for it to be after you've progressed in your light studies at the cost of shadow. With a max potential at your age, well, the muscles in her jaw worked. Don't let it go to your head, but the rarity of such potential is hard to fathom. And you were a farmer? I nodded, but squinted at the same time. Why? Can't a farm girl prove useful? To my surprise, Lyra guffawed. I see your instructors will have their hands full. She slapped the table every couple seconds until the laughter waned to a persistent chuckle. With such potential, a fisherman would be of use. Any kind of laborer. I was the daughter of a traveling merchant, and spent many years of my childhood scraping by on the road selling his wares. She thrust a finger toward me, and I wondered if a magic ray would fire from it. Study, be driven, and remain focused. Then you might heal whole raids with unbound efficiency. Yes, Master Lyra. You have to promise me you'll describe the expression of the first professor who learns about your potential. That she'd intuited my reservation about my high potential spoke volumes. Magister Lyra wasn't to be trifled with. Sure, I promise. Good. Now you need to choose your electives. She swept 2 fingers in the air, then text filled my mind window. Electives. Each first-year student is permitted to select one elective to complement their studies. Students in both magic schools may select any of the following electives. Alchemy. Learn the properties of herbs and other plants to concoct potions, salves, and poultices. Students who pass alchemy by reaching a skill level of 20 will be eligible to select advanced alchemy for their second-term elective, but are not required to do so, and the higher level tier is available through 3rd year. Weaving. Learn to create and patch clothing to support your casting abilities. Students who pass weaving by reaching a skill level of 20 will be eligible to select Weaving 2 for their second-term elective, but are not required to do so, and the higher level tier is available through 3rd year. Carpentry for combatants. Learn to create staves, wands, cudgels, and other weaponry to complement your casting abilities. Students who pass carpentry for combatants by reaching a skill level of 20 will be eligible to select from the following advanced courses. Carpentry for combatants, 2, an advanced class in weapon making for casters where students who have reached a skill level of 20 or higher can advance through rank 40. Or rune crafting. A fine complement to carpentry for combatants, rune crafting is an advanced skill used to draw runes for protection, offensive purposes, or as wards against demonic entities. In addition, highly advanced rune crafters can create magical scrolls to teach themselves spells or sell them in markets. I scanned each of the 3 choices twice, then read them with a more discerning eye. To her credit, Master Lyra waited patiently, leaving me to wonder how much of her time was spent sitting in silence while students chose their electives. Shabana's head swiveled in my direction. I'm thinking weaving. What do you think? My lips tightened. On the one hand, I enjoyed Shabana's company, and the thought of being on my own among classes full of people unknown to me carved a recess in my chest and brought a lump to my throat. But weaving would have been my last choice. The thrill of discovering rune crafting on my own at the carpentry shop at Fowler proved a bright image in my memory. Baba had been a fine woodworker, and we often whittled together, so I was familiar with bending wood to my will. I traced the runes and wavy lines carved into my staff, and the sight of them decided me. It might take 2 semesters to start rune crafting, but I had already learned the skill on my own. Perhaps my magic potential would provide a head start, or maybe I didn't understand the principle at all. After swallowing the lump in my throat and releasing a breath I hadn't realized I held, I shook my head. I would choose carpentry for combatants. Shabana's lip twitched like she suppressed a frown. Oh, well, considering your prowess in the woodshop, I can understand that. It won't offend you if I take weaving? Lyra leaned forward. Just so the 2 of you know, there aren't any rules against sharing your knowledge with each other, and students are welcome in all the labs. As I said, many will make their own clothing. There's always a supervisor on hand, and students registered in an elective are given priority. It might seem counterintuitive in a structured curriculum, but you're here to learn, and we're here to teach you. So the council agreed students who keep good standing in their classes will be granted freedoms to excel. She raised a finger. But you must not break any rules, and the professor of fundamentals of magic must transfer a chit to your interface to allow you entry into the labs to ensure you're keeping up in his vital class. I nodded understanding. Good. Now get out of my office. I have crystals to polish. She raised her head toward a side door. Stenil, where's my polishing rag?